Um, so my name is, well, first of all, welcome to all of you hardy souls on the last Friday afternoon of a conference. I hope we can give you something interesting to join in with the discussion and to go away thinking about. My name is Paul Jackson. Somewhat unbelievably, I'm a professor in a reputable institution. I'm in the International Development Department at the University of Birmingham. And I'm also a Commonwealth Commissioner for the Commonwealth Scholarships Commission, which is where this panel really started from. So the CSC is a non-departmental public body created to administer the United Kingdom's contribution to the multilateral Commonwealth Scholarship and Fellowship Plan. And basically, the CSC is the UK government's main way of providing scholarships and fellowships. It handles everything from master's degrees through to professional short-term sessions here in the UK and overseas. And it's very much development focused. One of my main roles as a commissioner is to be the lead for the evaluation and monitoring team and to chair the evaluation and monitoring committee of the CSC. And the CSC's been involved with sort of developing a quantitative and qualitative approach to trying to evaluate the effects of scholarships on people who come to the UK to be educated for some time. And we've been evolving that approach to evaluation over a number of years. And in fact, hopefully, we've nearly finished a very big report, a very big evaluation report, which hopefully will be available to more people in some form or another, so that you can see the work we've been doing in terms of trying to provide some very detailed evaluation on the impact of scholarships to the UK on home countries as well as home individuals. The CSC, again, has been evolving its approach. It's carried out a baseline study. It has a series of post-scholarship surveys. It collects a lot of data, has around 26,000 records of individuals who've had scholars. They cover pretty much every Commonwealth country. They're concentrated in the low and a little bit less so the middle income Commonwealth countries, but it's really, really widespread. And this kind of brings me to leadership, which is one of the areas where we as the CSC have been working on, and where I also have a professional interest as a professor in the development department, because obviously, as well as being a commissioner, we take scholars from the Commonwealth Scholarship Commission, teach them, and are interested in what they do when they go back to their home countries. And leadership in particular is extremely hard to quantify, as I'm sure all of you know, and extremely hard to measure. So we thought it would be a useful and interesting approach to gather different perspectives on higher education experiences, what kind of leaders were being produced, and what the impact of all of this teaching and all of this effort actually is. So here we are. We have assembled a really interesting set of panelists for the discussion, and I'm going to say a little bit about each one, and I'll go in the order that they're going to be talking. So first up is Dr. Joe Davies, and Joe's the program director of the BSc of International Development at the University of Reading and lead of the International Development Teaching Forum. Prior to joining Reading in 2015, Joe worked in the humanitarian department at Oxfam, and before that was a consultant at the African Studies Centre at the University of Oxford. Next, we have Abiyomi Atijozan, Centre for Gender and Social Policy Studies at Obafemi Awolowo University in Ile-Ife in Nigeria. That used to be the University of Ife, did it not? I think. I'm getting old, forgive me. So she is a research fellow at the Centre for Gender and Social Policy Studies. And she has actually written this paper in conjunction with two of her colleagues, but I'll let her introduce those two and say a little bit about them if she wants to. Her own research focus is on the issues of women entrepreneurship, gender and health, specifically on the intersection of health and sociocultural issues on the well-being of male and female. And she's a gender expert with many publications in the field. Next, we have Abbas Ishaka from the University of Glasgow. Abbas is I love this description. Abbas is a development enthusiast. I think I used to be a development enthusiast a lot of years ago. He has a 3-year professional background in policy research and inclusive education, curriculum development. He's also a Commonwealth scholar, as a number of these people are, and a member of the Council for Education in the Commonwealth. Next, we have Philip Antwi-Aguier, who sadly told me that he was an Arsenal fan the other day. So he's not feeling very happy with himself after the early results of the return of the Premier League. He's from Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana. And Philip is a senior lecturer, and he was a Commonwealth scholar as well. He obtained his PhD in 2013 from the University of Leeds. His research is really in developing innovative multi-scale methodologies for assessing vulnerability and adaptation to climate change for dry farming systems. And Philip was a lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Special Report on Global Warming, where he worked closely with other scientists across the globe on sustainable development, poverty eradication, and reducing inequalities. Another person who has published extensively in international journals, and he's also a visiting researcher at the University of Leeds. And there are panelists, and holding it all together, the person who is actually, actually the two people who are going to be doing most of the work, it's not me. Those of you who've heard me speak before will be relieved if I tell you that I'm not going to be on the podium for very long. I'm topping and tailing the whole thing. So I'm introducing people and then coming back as a special guest appearance at the end. Firstly, I just wanted to note Brendan Harrison, who is the Senior Evaluation Officer of the Commonwealth Scholarships Commission. And actually, instead of using him in terms of using his extensive brain and his knowledge of evaluation, we're getting him to do all of the technical support here. So he's going to be shifting people on and off the stage and talking to panelists and all of that. So thank you to Brendan in advance for doing that. And then the person who's actually going to be doing an awful lot of work is Dr. Faye Taylor. And Faye is the Deputy Director of Global Partnerships at the Association of Commonwealth Universities, which is closely associated with the ACU. And the ACU creates opportunities for more than 530 university members from more than 50 countries to collaborate and share knowledge to support contribution to sustainable development. And she also oversees the Queen Elizabeth Commonwealth Scholarships, which is a sister scheme to the CSC in the UK, which provides opportunities for master's study in 20 low and middle income countries across the Commonwealth. So without further ado, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to hand you over to Faye. So I hope that you enjoyed the discussions and I look forward to hearing from you later.
Hello everyone, really nice to be here this afternoon, and thank you to Paul for the introductions and again to Brendan and CSC for organising this fascinating discussion this afternoon. I'm just going to talk to you quickly about the format of the event before kicking off our discussions. We've essentially got an hour at the beginning to have sort of 4 major discussions. We've asked each of our speakers to make one particular intervention, and then we'll allow some time for the others to respond, and we'll go through that process 4 times over the first hour. We'll have a really short break for a chance to people to talk to each other in the audience, etc. And then we'll come back for the last half an hour for a wider question and answer session with everyone in the audience. So as and when questions occur to you throughout, please do ask them. Use the ask button at the bottom of your toolbar, and we'll feed them through, group them, and feed them through to our lovely panelists. And if you've got particular questions for particular people, of course, please do let me know. So the reason we're all here today, and the big question that we have an hour and a half or so to try and solve, is what is the role of higher education in providing leadership in a development context? It's not an easy question to answer, and it's particularly relevant, I think, at the moment in terms of the complex situation that universities occupy in society. So university graduates, as we know, are expected to provide leadership across all sectors of society, particularly or often in development contexts. And universities are their seats of learning, conveying learning which is, of course, based on political and economic values. Universities are themselves also sites of reform. They have to be sites of reform. So there's a big question about the forms in which universities listen to students and students can challenge the status quo in their own education. So the way that we'll step through the 4 discussions, but we have different angles on this. So we have an angle looking about pedagogy, we've got analytical frameworks, social context, and also students and leaders who've been through the process and reflections on that. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn to our first speaker, Jo Davies, and I'm going to ask her a question, which she has seen in advance. Ask Jo to speak for a while, and then everyone else on the panel will be able to reflect on that for a few minutes. So, Jo, the question that we have for you is, how do development-related studies impart the types of critical thinking skills needed to challenge the systemic causes of underdevelopment?
Hi, Faye. Thanks very much. It was a really interesting question. Oh, just checking that I'm on. Yep. Okay. Brave new world of technology. We've all been challenged together. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, this idea about criticality. Yeah, so I think one of the first things to think about when you're talking about embedding criticality is in our courses on development at the moment, we're really being pulled in opposite directions by two competing forces. This is how I find it at the moment. We are really trying to balance calls to embed employability into our degrees, but at the same time, we're asking students to really develop this criticality towards the development project as a whole. It's hard because our students are paying tuition fees for their courses on the whole, and they need to get a job by the end of it. But are we trying to embed employability skills that are suiting them to work in power structures that we are then, on the other hand, asking them to question? So that is a bit of a confounding context in which to rather depressingly start off, and it's something that hopefully, this was only a very short introduction at the moment, so hopefully it's something we might come back to in the wider discussion. So just to focus now for the moment on the specific question that you asked me about embedding criticality, it's really hard at the moment because we're in a difficult position where we are currently experiencing a questioning of the development studies project as a whole. Uma Kathari asking us to sort of challenge our complicity with Western power, Western knowledge, accusing us of silencing the third world subaltern, Kilby asking us to stop presenting this unidirectional approach to development, whereby it's something done by the north to the south, which are such valid questions. And yet, when you have a first-year student who has come to development studies, or any student actually has come to development studies with a very sincere intention to try and challenge the unjust power structures that they see around them, it can be extremely challenging to have these approaches questioned. It can even sort of risk disillusionment. So we find ourselves, it is a difficult thing to try and actually challenge. Now, the reason why I just sort of briefly looked at development studies itself as a project rather than the structures you were mentioning is I think that from the very first, it's a bit disingenuous not to face head on the challenge that we have in the fact that what we teach can be part of the problem as well as part of the solution. So I think that's one of the things that it's important to consider. I also, and haven't got time in this brief initial bit to talk about, but I'd also actually challenge the conceptualization of underdevelopment. I'd also challenge, don't tell my students, the conception of development. And it's terrible having heard my fellow speaker being called a development enthusiast. That sounded so much more lovely than me challenging development. So I feel like a real curmudgeon now, but I do have issues with this notion of a conceptualization of development. So my challenge is to try and think about how we impart this criticality. And I think the only way we can really do it is by simultaneously questioning both the what and the how of what we teach. But it's something whereby we need to sort of try and confront this role of education in reproducing power asymmetries.
Great.
Fantastic. Right. So basically I was talking about this notion of the risk of education at replicating power asymmetries. And the sort of first tool I went to grasp for in dealing with these ideas is Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy, whereby he's actually sort of operating through a dialogic learning. Now, what we're talking about when we're talking about this is this notion of through dialogue, we come to understand that there are no, as he puts it, total ignorance or total sages. Everybody comes together to learn more than they knew before. It's quite a sort of challenging idea, but it contrasts with this banking notion of education, in which you have students who are just receptacles to be sort of filled with knowledge, because it's this banking approach to education that allows, as Freire puts it, elites to name the world. Okay, so once you've got this education, this knowledge that you've created, and then you fill students up with this knowledge, it is the elites who've created that knowledge, and it's the elites who then have this voice to name the world. So when we're thinking about it in these terms, we start to understand pedagogy as a social theory, as rather than just a teaching method. It is it's a subversive force. We're looking at our reality in order to be able to transform it. So that's quite we need to sort of understand the fact that, although, especially for us in development studies, because of the very nature of our topic, of what we're teaching social change, but we're also affecting social change through our teaching. Okay, so we need to be aware of this sort of this loop, because what we really want is for the right for everybody to be able to name their world. That's the leap that we really sort of want to make. So to go back to your question and to answer your question, my answer is really twofold. First of all, going back to first principles, I think that we need to have a candid and open conversation about who exactly are the stakeholders when we are defining and designing the development studies curricula. We need to actually challenge ourselves and think, and moving it outside the closed shop of the academia, sort of replicating ideas, and really ask ourselves who should be the stakeholders in creating this, and then really consider about how to engage those. I'm interested to see how the sort of decolonizing the curriculum study group that I think was set up at the AGM at lunchtime is going to go forward as potentially an arena to discuss this in more depth. But secondly, when we're talking about how we frame this with our students, I think we need to sort of really think about talking to our students in terms of dialogue and problem-based learning. So that's how I want us to approach it. It's difficult because once you start talking about dialogue, and a dialogue must be between equals, you are moving away from this total ignorance and total sages idea, but that challenges our roles as teachers. And it's very hard to get somebody to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it, as people say. So we don't want to talk ourselves out of a job. So that becomes quite hard, because we still got to explore these complex ideas with our students. And what is our role in that? If we're not supposed to be filling them up with this sacred knowledge that we keep carefully kept behind the gates of the academy, how do we start to explore it? Best successes I've had is when I've taken a risk and acted as a facilitator rather than a teacher. So it's when I'm really sort of engaging in sort of these complex problem-based learnings, whereby you find your students really engaging with the complexity of knowledge. So I had a project whereby I used, my students were shown unstructured interviews that were taped in South Africa by a colleague in Wageningen. They were completely unstructured, and it was hard because the nature of the project was that the students were given very little scaffolding at the beginning. And the quotes from the students were, this is really scary. I'm really confused. I've never heard of KwaZulu-Natal and I have no idea where it is, that sort of thing. So that's where we were going from at the beginning. By the end of it, it was really wonderful, actually, to see the different relationship that the students had with the knowledge that they had created. And actually rather fun to remind them, crikey, you didn't even know where KwaZulu-Natal was when we first started this. And they'd really moved on leaps and bounds. But the important thing was that I also asked them to reflect on the process of learning. That was really interesting because they understood that they had to try and decide from themselves by listening to this almost unmediated lived experience from these DVDs. They had to try and understand where the priorities lay, and they'd had to make those challenging decisions. The result was, and it was quite unnerving for them, was that they were then faced with this terrifying reality that potentially they weren't looking for a right answer because perhaps there wasn't a right answer. Perhaps what they were doing was dealing with a set of complex and competing challenges and needs. And perhaps they were doing this in a context of limited resources, of unequal knowledge access, of embedded power inequalities. And it was really, it was uncomfortable for them, and it was frustrating for them, but it was a way of actually seeing them move beyond what is also uncomfortable and frustrating for us, is moving beyond what I would see as this collective delusion of how we see development at the moment. And I do actually see it in that way. I think this sort of notion of development, how we understand it, needs far more challenging. This idea that we are moving towards a fixed point of solution and you know, great, we'll all get there and everything will be fine. And it's a collective delusion. People don't actually challenge that, and having to engage with their own learning processes and ask these questions really did help expose the students to that. And that was through this dialogic learning, this quite radical approach. So I think that by doing that, if we force ourselves and our students to look this collective delusion in the face and actually move beyond it, that's when we'll start being able to try and challenge and really aim for genuine change. I think I've gone way over my 5 minutes, sorry.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Joyce. There's a really rich response there, and I'm sure we could have a conference on a lot of the points you brought out there. But I'm really interested in your reflections on the sort of the learning process itself and how that can be embedded in, and the fact that there is no ultimate answer because the students themselves and their stakeholders are creating the change as well as reflecting on it, as well as learning from it. So thank you for really, in a really articulate way, describing some of the nexus points and ways that very practical tools that you can use when you're designing courses. I'm just going to ask the two other speakers who are currently on the panel with us if they have any reflections. So Abbas, do you have any reflections? If you could unmute yourself and just on this particular topic, just to add to Joe's talk there.
I think Joe has made a very important conversation around the dialogic discourse of teaching development, and you know, we've come to realize that we have to ask the very difficult question of what do we teach and how do we teach it. So more importantly, we need to understand the impact that the curriculum, the pedagogy, and even the classroom environment are having on development for especially people undergoing courses in our institutions. So I think that's just all I have to say regarding that.
Thank you very much. And Ayabami, did you have any comments on this subject?
Okay. I'm actually reflecting on the questions: who should teach, who is teaching, to whom, and the environment. I think these three things are really important for us to reflect on. The people that are teaching are really important for us to halt this issue of inequalities and discrimination. And to whom? The students should be able to, the curriculum should be the type that can actually help the students to think radically in order to tackle this social injustice and inequality in the education system. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And then finally, Philip, did you have any quick comments on this subject?
Yeah, Faith, thank you very much. Joe, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. I'll be very quick. Picking up from where my colleagues left, I think we also need to understand who actually defines underdevelopment and whose perspective counts. Who are we doing all these things for? Do we even know our targets? Who are their perspective taken into consideration when we are developing some of these teaching methods? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. And it's actually a really pertinent question and a discussion which leads straight into the next subject. And this is going to be a question that I asked first to Ayobami to respond to, and then we'll do a similar quick reflection between us. But the question here really touches on that, and it's how have development-related higher education courses responded to issues such as those raised by the Decolonize the Curriculum movement? So over to you, Ayobami.
Thank you so much. As we all know, that campaign to decolonize curriculum are sparking heated debates across the globe, and it's focused on destabilizing Eurocentric conceptual framework and actively contesting the continued colonization and inequalities in university programs and campuses. And development-related courses have actually opened up the inequality existing at various levels and sectors in the economy, and have devised appropriate strategies to actually tackle this by formulating development-oriented courses of study in higher education institutes in many countries. The gender inequality pervasive in the educational sector in the developing country, including Nigeria, can actually be traced back to the period of Western colonization, in which the education system developed by the colonial master reinforced their patriarchal belief, which streamlined women's education towards fulfilling their specified gender roles. However, the current tide in the design of development, the current tide in the design of development studies in higher institutions is breaking this tide through the development and implementation of curriculum that address development from a gender perspective. Unlike many other courses in the institution which address development from homogeneous perspective, development studies, which focus on social justice and equality, have developed curriculum which consider gender and other socio-economic factors as an important predictor of developmental outcomes. And also, the field of development studies is one of the fields that started online distant learning in response to decolonize curriculum issues, as online development studies curricula build capacity to critically challenge dominant development practices. In addition, online development study courses offer potentially unique avenues for anti-colonial approaches, creating new possibilities for inclusive participation and for challenging the status quo, as development courses focus on equality and social justice. Finally, in response to decolonized curriculum issue, scholarships are offered to students, especially the marginalized group of students, in order to create equal participation platform for all. This was actually done to bridge the inequality and social injustice in education system. Thank you.
Is that any better?
Yeah, it's better than fair.
Perfect. Thank you. So many thanks indeed, Ayobami. I was really glad to hear you reflect on the opportunities of online education, particularly in this, as an opportunity for challenging the status quo, for redressing some of those inequities. So thank you so much for raising that, because it's obviously one of the biggest shifts that we're seeing at pace in higher education at the moment around that. I'm going to offer the same chance to reflect on this subject to each of our speakers. So this time, perhaps I could start with Philip.
Thank you very much, Ayomi, for that nice presentation. I think I want to quickly say that what I see is most developing countries have inherited our national curriculum from our colonial masters, who for some reason continue to devise mechanisms and ways to hold on or to make sure that our national curriculums are quietly or greatly influenced by what they do. I mean, for instance, in Ghana, I'm not too sure in Nigeria and other countries, in Ghana, we continue to learn European history, British history, and those kind of things. But you begin to wonder how many schools in the UK learn about Ghanaian history. Who cares about Ghanaian history? So I think we need to begin to find proper means of decoupling ourselves from some of these things. But you cannot also separate how you decolonize your curriculum from funding issues. If you have most of your educators being trained by a particular system, I am particularly greatly influenced by my training in the UK. So my teaching, my research are all influenced by what I learned from the UK. And I'm sure most of us that have benefited from Commonwealth University or from Commonwealth Scholarship or any other forms of this in through the UK. So we need to be able to stand on our own, begin to look for innovative opportunity to fund some of the things that we do, so as to be able to decouple our national curriculum from our colonial masters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. Abbas, could I turn to you now for your reflections?
Okay. Thank you very much, Bai. I would like to borrow the idea or the celebrated point of Professor Amartya Sen when he concluded that development is freedom. So tying that to the fact that if you actually want to achieve development in the global south or in Africa particularly, we have to address the issue of epistemic freedom. And in that regard, decolonization, which has been generally understood to have begun with political decolonization, which predicated on seeking political kingdom first. And that was achieved in the 20th century. However, the current struggles for epistemic freedom have provoked a need for us to rethink the decolonial trajectories. While it is true that political, economic, and cultural, and even epistemological aspects of decolonization were and are always intertwined, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that the sequencing arose from a practical strategic logic of struggles against colonialism, which privileged attainment of political sovereignty first. And in the core constitution of say economic development, cultural development, or even epistemological development, epistemic freedom is very, very key if we actually want to deal with fundamental issues of say critical consciousness building, which are essential prerequisites for both political and economic freedom. So I believe that universities in the global south or in Africa particularly have a lot to do looking at the burgeoning ages of these universities, and it is in their purview to now decide what kind of curriculum do they want to teach for what kind of development. So I still see that there is a distinction, a dichotomy between what individual nations or nation states are trying to achieve and what universities are teaching. So this curriculum that were inherited through Darwin, okay, deposited somewhere, and we have another a rethink of how we want to use our education system to achieve development. And also in that regard, while we are trying to decolonize that curriculum, we should also try to understand that we are not allowing the existing context of neoliberalism or the urge for globalization to affect indigeneity or even the originality of knowledges evolving from Africa. So that is my my 2 cents on how epistemic freedom in particular can foster or engender development in Africa.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And moving to Joe, your reflections on this. I was thinking when you were speaking, it's quite interesting that the language has been about decolonizing the curriculum, but your focus, you were trying to get us to focus even more deeply on the pedagogy as well. So I wondered if you felt if this discussion helps us get far enough. But over to you.
It's so interesting. It was such a great presentation, and followed by brilliant comments from Philip and Abbas there. It was really opening up some fantastic questions. Yes, definitely thinking about the pedagogy, but it was really interesting when Philip mentioned about the funding, and the idea that the sort of drivers of a lot of where we're taught, or where people who are taught and then returning to Southern universities are having their influences is from funding. And I do quite a lot of work looking at China in Africa, and it's going to be quite interesting to see how are we going to see sort of African universities torn between these competing scholarship funds from a sort of Western point of view and a Chinese point of view. And where is the understanding of democracy going to be in that particular dichotomy? And most importantly of all, where is the African voice going to be to fight against these sort of competing, caught in a new sort of knowledge Cold War potentially between, not that I'm wanting to stir up any tensions that are happening, but we need to not lose sight of African voices. They're being caught in a proxy war about this knowledge, and the stuff that Abbas was saying, it's exactly spot on. These questions of epistemic freedom. I really like unfortunately now gone, but Norman Girvan, the Caribbean academic, who spoke an awful lot about power, institutional power, how sort of you're talking about economic power and military power, but the power of knowledge underpinning an awful lot of these things. I can't remember the exact quote, but the idea of the most powerful weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Once you can start sort of really developing this epistemic power over people, it becomes presenting things as axiomatic that still need questioning, and yet everybody is told that is the way things are, and that's the way things just have to continue. So yeah, I think it's I think these questions of funding, questions of epistemic power really do get to the heart of these questions of decolonization.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And again, you've seamlessly linked into the third question in our set. So thank you for that. The reflections you had on the sort of geopolitical context around this, as well as the individual learner at the heart of it, I think is a nice link to the next question, which is for Abbas in the first instance, which is how do international students, particularly those from countries that are the focus of development efforts, experience higher education with respect to development? Thank you.
Thanks, Faye. And I'll be looking at how international students, especially those from countries focusing on development, are experiencing higher education in the UK. And we all know that developing education or challenging marginalization is a moral and political undertaking, and it underscores the importance of understanding some frameworks that shape assumptions being made about education and the normative expectations that we expect from education, such as development. During my program, I was engaging the contemporary strategies of international development within a much longer history of, say, global entanglement organized by colonial capitalist relations, rationalities, and even subjectivities. And in connection with concerns faced by international students at both epistemic and material level. So in that regard, I was assuming that internationalization or the export of education is taking the stance of continuing formal imperial political connections that have evolved into financially beneficial markets and sources of income for Western universities. So I was interested in documenting the lived experience of international students from developing countries while I was interrogating the teaching excellence framework, looking at the metrics on internationalization of our education. And in the first instance, I was forced to look at the role of public policy discourses in engendering intellectual and epistemic violence towards international students. So in this case, I realized that unless there is a change in terms of how international students are being constructed policy-wise, there is not going to be a much change to be expected from internationalization. And also, the experiences of international students in relation to development, looking at the questions that have been asked, is focused on two key issues. And the first is Eurocentrism of the curriculum. So majority of the students were of the opinion that the curriculum of UK universities is somewhat Eurocentric in nature. And it was established that most academics don't include international case studies and perspectives in their course content, especially those in the science and engineering department. And which evinces that some courses are declared universal. So they say it's kind of universality being attributed to some courses, and therefore academic may not feel the need to integrate international elements into teaching and learning of these courses. So I argued that this kind of disciplinary nature affect how staff respond towards curriculum internationalization. And we all know that international education is so nothing if the curriculum is not internationalized, or content that can actually, or perspectives that can add value to those on board to learn is not being reflected. So I was actually straddling with three key issues, or three key reflections, and which is the very first one is, how do we encourage academics, especially those in the natural sciences and technology, to approach international values and content in their discipline, which remains an issue that is not yet explored. And also, I was looking at students on pursuit of international education are not being provided the opportunities to interact with issues from other cultures due to dominant Eurocentric perspectives, and thereby rendering the knowledge gained less useful in the context, in their local context, because people or students who are relating that the knowledge being gained is not possibly adapted or adaptable to the problems they are trying to solve when they get back home. So in that regard, I was thinking about the issue of power dynamics, mainly in structural and productive lines. And this power dynamics is embedded in the curriculum in connection with how internationalization discourse and the effect of power in the production, maintenance, and dominance of specific knowledge, as seen in policy initiatives which exert a form of suppression of knowing in the international students. And this occurs so that institutions can effectively sell the perceived superior knowledge and cachet of knowledge ownership in relation to imperial virtues and enlightenment. So having said that, I think we can agree that the experiences of international students on the extent of internationalization of curriculum speaks to the fact that there is more for UK universities to do in terms of internationalization. It's not just about adding a Black author to the reading list. It is about being critical, about understanding that, okay, this is what these people need to achieve this development. For instance, I took I took about 6 courses, and none of my courses had anything to do with where I was coming from. So if you are designing an international program, definitely you should be able to, you know, incorporate international content, and not just putting 1 or 2 reading lists in the content. It's about, okay, say I have 6 courses, and 50% of this course should be able to address say 50% of my problem. Then it is now up to me to you know, contextualize the remaining part of the knowledge gained to what I want to achieve as a leader in development. So another thing that is very key to the experiences of international students in the UK is color of micro invalidations, micro insults, and even racism. So we've seen just recently how movements are, you know, coming up regarding what people of color are facing in our institutions. As we know, we have no white vice chancellor in the UK, and even though looking at the underrepresentation of Black academics, we know it is very, very impossible for universities in the UK to actually achieve achieve inclusion and diversity as being, you know, being paraded in most of the policy documents. So, but most importantly, within these institutions, my findings showed that students do experience racism on different level, and there is a kind of intersectionality in how people do experience racism, say in terms of religion or gender, or even the country they are from. So most importantly, these 2 canons of experience are seen by students from, say, Global South. What they experience, they tend to come and gather a chunk of knowledge that can actually deliver development. But however, they have other things, you know, accompanying this experience, which is normal. And at the same time, these experiences do not negate those good experiences that we, or say international students, do enjoy on campuses. For instance, we've seen students, you know, making comments about how this education they've achieved or they've received is going to add value to their career prospects. And at the same time, we've seen people that have come to, you know, to the global north to achieve a particular degree, and they go back to make fantastic contribution to the development of their nation. But however, there is much to do in addressing inclusion of people, of students, or of international students, also in addressing their inclusion in terms of curriculum. So tilting this concentration of curriculum to people coming from the global north or global south, to be able to enable them to understand how they can actually face their questions. The questions they were bringing on board while coming to the UK should be answered, if not all, but to a larger percentage, rather than you know, leaving them to be disappointed in line with, okay, coming to the UK and thinking that majority of things are just rhetorics and are not really performative in nature. And another thing that I observed is even students are aware of their consumer power. I mean, international students are aware of their consumer power, and whenever they feel being discriminated against or feel disappointed. They tend to think, and I'm paying this huge amount of money, and this is what I get to get at the end of the day. So with this awareness, there is need for more to be done regarding regarding the experiences of international students and how that will impact the market of higher education in the UK. So that is these are the key issues I've observed as regarding the experiences of international students in the UK, specifically to those coming from development-oriented countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that talk. That was brilliant. And I think you took us much further than just the experience of international students, but also to a call to arms, I think, or a call to action in terms of how we work with students, or how students can be co-creators within the curriculum so that it achieves its objectives for them, as you've said. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently in the context of COVID-19 and what internationalization means in a university context. And with student communities who are very diverse, there is a lot more I think we can do in terms of internationalization at home, which feeds in and draws these perspectives in a more co-creative manner. So I'm just going to ask for quick reflections on this subject before we move to the fourth and final mixed piece. Maybe I could go to Ayabami first, who've just joined us.
Okay, thank you so much. When the last presenter was speaking, I was able to pick few things, and what I would like to speak on is the issue of power play in the classroom. I think the international students, they actually experience this issue of power play and discrimination when it comes to how the curriculum are taught, and from the lecturers that are teaching the curriculum. I think the last presenter mentioned the issue of discrimination. I think that is very, very, especially to people coming from developing countries, and especially if you are Black. I think there's this issue of discrimination against them. The issue of power play, it's a lot of distraction, and also the issue of funding, the fee. The school fees is so high that majority of the international students that can actually have a voice to make a change in their countries cannot afford it. I think those are the things that, and so many of them, they end up dropping out because they cannot afford these school fees. The school fees are really high. And I think when I was presenting, I mentioned the issue of scholarship. Not everyone can be given scholarship, but there are some of them that can make a change in their various countries. They can actually, you can easily stimulate that radical thinking in them in order to make that social change. But because of this issue of high school fees, high tuition fee, they end up dropping out. And this is really an issue. It's an issue that we need to deliberate more on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if I could ask all the speakers who aren't speaking to pop themselves on mute, I'm going to come to Joe next, if I may, just for quick reflections here. But in this small break, I've also noticed we don't yet have any questions from the audience, which will be taken after the break. But as we're talking, do continue to sort of think about what you'd like to ask and pop them in there if you want to. So Joe.
Yeah, it was again really interesting ideas raised. I was interested about this notion of going back with a chunk of knowledge. I thought, yeah, that was a really interesting way of putting it, that you are carrying back this chunk of knowledge that may or may not be relevant to you. You know, and it's this, it really reflected on this banking approach to knowledge that I was referring to, that you are a receptacle upon which you can just have this sort of this chunk of knowledge sort of put into, and this is why this co is so important. This idea that we're moving beyond. There was a brilliant comment that Tabas was saying, where he said this notion of actually being a consumer and being able to sort of challenge this idea of this epistemic power, of this idea that you can that you need to have your voice heard in this sort of creation of something that otherwise is not relevant, not relevant to you or not relevant to other stakeholders. So I think it's all feeding into this exact same thrust, which seems to be, we need to go back to thinking about not just, in fact, on some of my work on this, I've used the exact same phrase basically, which is you can't just stick some black authors on your reading list and say that you've decolonized the curriculum. You need to go deeper than that. You need to go further back and think about how the knowledge is being created. Who is the knowledge being created for? Why is it being created in that manner? What's it being used for? You need to ask the holistic approach as to our understanding of knowledge. So we're really taking it back to the bare bones and first principles and thinking, okay, where has the curriculum come from and why has the curriculum come like that, really? So yeah, I love this idea of the way that he clearly recognized the same as I had, which is this, the challenge of this banking approach and how we ought to move to this dialogic way of learning.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jo. Yeah, some really nice mirror comments, I thought, to your piece there. And finally, Philip, any comments on this?
Not really, but I just want to say thank for the presentation by Abbas and supported by June. I lost my internet at some point, but I think one of the things that I need to stress is that before our education from through international education can have impact, we need to be able to look at the content of what we are teaching, and this has been overly stressed this afternoon. Are you teaching me something that will not be, that I cannot apply when I come back home in my local context? We need to be able to look at what pertains in most of the developing countries, how the system runs, the culture, and other things that can greatly influence the kind of outcomes that we get from the implementation of some of these educational policies. So let's take care of how we can make sure that whatever we are teaching students in the UK or whatever, Canada, US, any part of the Europe, how can the students, when they return to their home country, how can they use such information on their return? That is quite critical. Otherwise, whatever you are doing, if you are teaching something that you are just interested in being passing, and you cannot use it to benefit your home country, then it doesn't help. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. And actually, obviously, the final question, which is to you, I think is going to help us sort of flip this piece round and look at those, what we're actually trying to achieve here. So the question for you, Philip, was how do international students use the skills they've learned in higher education and development contexts in their home countries?
Thank you very much, Faye. I'm praying and hoping that my internet will stay on, it doesn't misbehave this afternoon. I think the whole idea of scholarships, especially Commonwealth, many other scholarship schemes, is to be able to produce some caliber of people who, on their return back home, will be able to influence the development agenda of their own countries. I mean, that is the essence of most of the things that we come to do of international education. So my question this afternoon is to reflect on how, as international students, we can use our skills that we gain from or we learn from higher education in development context in our home countries. I'll use myself as reflect more on what I've been able to do, or some of my colleagues have been able to do. And one of the key things is that if you did a PhD or a master's program or even a graduate program, you develop certain kind of skills. You improve your communication skills, you improve your analytical skills, you improve your leadership skills, and all these skills are quite important when you come back home to help with the development agenda of the country. One key thing is that having international education sort of broadens your understanding or the way you view things, your scope of things and the way you view things, so that you become broader in your thinking and move beyond that kind of myopic understanding of issues from your local context into an international context, which is quite helpful in terms of reshaping or shaping development in the local context. What I want to also add is that it also helps you to build your network. One of the things that has helped me over the years is the network that I built whilst in the UK. I still do a lot of work with my PhD supervisor through collaboration and other things. And most of the things that we've done have impacted on local policy and on local stuff that we do here. So, and I made a lot of friends from all over the world who were part of the Commonwealth Scholarship Scheme, and even at the University of Leeds where school. So, and it's not only me, most of the people who benefit from international education are able to build their network, which eventually becomes quite critical in shaping development agenda in their local authorities or in their local national context. It also helps us to be able to contribute to debate in the international arena when it comes to our specific areas of research. Let me give myself as an example. I'm into climate change, and the education that I had has helped me to develop me into a better researcher. And it's not only me, I'm not being selfish here, but it has helped me to then contribute to some of the things that we are doing at the national level. On my return, I've been involved in the development of national climate change adaptation framework to guide what we call the National Adaptation Plan for the country, which is a huge thing. I've also been involved in developing the adaptation plan for the infrastructure sector, comprising of the energy, transport, and water sector. And I'm currently leading a team of consultants to do a national gender mainstreaming toolkit. So all these things can influence what we are doing locally. I mean, if you talk of climate change is a big issue for Ghana because our economy depends very much on rainfed agricultural systems. So anything that has the potential to derail the projected increase in the agricultural sector has the potential to also draw us back in terms of our development. So anything that can contribute there is in a way contributing to our development. International education also helps us to take political positions. As I said, it's obvious it takes a political position across the various levels at the local level, regional level, and even at the national level. If you look at most of the people who are doing this, most of them would have been steady outside. And then administration at the university level is also a key thing that most of the people who return home are able to engage in. So we feel we develop our skills, our human resource skills, to be able to fill critical areas when it comes to the development of the nation. And of course, teaching, you cannot talk of teaching in the, you cannot talk of development in most of these contexts without a well-structured university education. And most of the university lecturers tend to have their, I think one of the reasons most of us tend to have our PhD or masters from the developed countries, the true international education. So international education also helps us to resource our research centers, our universities, which then goes on to play a critical role in the development of the nation. I mean, we cannot talk of proper development for the nation without the impact that research centers and universities play in that regard. In addition to that, I think all these things sum up to say that our skills in terms of the leadership skills are developed, so that by the time we come home, we are in a capacity, we are in a position to be able to do most of the things that we need to do. And one of the other things is that if you study outside or international education, you become adaptable. You are able to adapt to different situations and different conditions. There's nothing more stressful than to get to UK in the middle of the winter from a very warm country, and once you're able to adjust to the weather, and adjust to the food, and adjust to the culture, I'm sure you can adjust to most of the things that when you come home that may be presented to you, and you can move on. You become quite adjustable, and you can move on and implement the local development agenda. I was speaking for close to 7 minutes. I'll end there, and then I'm sure when the questions come, we can, and then I will leave it for my other panelists to also contribute. Thank you very much, Faith.
And now? Good. Sometimes I have to hit mute twice, I think. Thank you so much, Philip. And I was just thinking that the skills and characteristics of adaptability that you were talking about there are exactly the same characteristics that we're saying we need to embed into the learning experience and the curriculum and pedagogy behind it. So it's all revolving around very similar values and characteristics today. I'm just going to ask for quick reflections from the other three before we have a small break and Q&A. So perhaps, Abbas, I could ask you to reflect back on what Philip just said.
Hello, can you hear me? All right. Okay. Thank you, Philip, for that very wonderful presentation. It's actually underscores what myself as a Commonwealth scholar I've been looking forward to get done, or even to relate with when I return back to my country. But I'm still not comfortable with the fact that people from the global south must come to the global north to study before they can engender development in their countries. So I still think that, as we all can agree, that development is not linear, and it's kind of a very complex issue. So no institution can claim to understand how the complexity of development. So I would like to put it straight to Commonwealth Scholarship Commission in engaging universities more on how they can actually make more commitment to development. I was practically thinking about how, say, having an exchange program between countries or universities in the global south and universities in global north for Commonwealth scholars to have, say, a double-sided kind of experience, and they can be able to make comparison regarding how they can make a commitment to the nation. So, and in that regard, there must be, an agreement to terms on how UK universities will be delivering these courses, because I know a number of universities in the UK are in agreement with Commonwealth scholarship, and they are in funding agreement and with Commonwealth scholarship. So it would be better, not just in funding agreement, but in some particular courses. I know there are some courses in the Commonwealth shared that are focusing on development, but even though, as these courses are being flagged as development related courses, the content of these courses are not actually delivering what they ought to to be delivering. So the evaluation team or committee, we need to do more on what's the content, like being on ground in these universities, to see what students are actually facing in terms of contextualizing the knowledge they're gaining to what they intend to achieve. Maybe when we write our development impact statement while applying for the scholarship, there should be kind of a follow-up from the point of program, like point of induction to the end of the program. So that can can create a trajectory on the process of you achieving a development project. And that project should be, say, something that you can easily take back home, or even should be embedded in your home country. So I think that will make more meaning to how the commission is funding development related courses. And again, I am of the opinion that the sustainable development goals in which the commission is revolving its funding around is kind of, or say, more of deficit discourses that we have to critically engage with. So if actually we are committed to development, we should not just grab those goals, or those the so-called global goals as global goals. We should be particular, say specific, in terms of what a particular country needs for development, and what knowledge do we, or what kind of human resources do we need to build for them. Then if you're able to tailor these development needs according to the needs of individual society or countries, then the commission can actually achieve, or the fact that the international education that the commission is trying to bring at par can actually deliver the goals of the commission. I think that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abbas. And Paul may want to reflect on some of this at the end when he comes back to close the session. But what I would also say, I mean, the point that you made about pairing universities perhaps, or students in different countries around this, and other scholarships modes as well. Paul mentioned the Queen Elizabeth Commonwealth Scholarships earlier that we also run at the ACU, which is about, which offers master's opportunities in other countries that are not the UK, so other countries across the Commonwealth, creating all sorts of different directions of travel, because sometimes it is really useful to go and study in a very different but potentially some equivalent country in terms of climate or in terms of agriculture, etc. So there are other models as well, but I know Paul has time later to come back and reflect on some of that. Joe, would you mind jumping in next?
Yeah, just very briefly, I just was very interested, framing first of all, to say up front, the point there about the uncomfortable nature of a global South person coming to the global North to learn about how to develop their country. It's such a good point, and it does reflect so many sort of historical and current power imbalances. Having said that, I have to say, hearing about the various different benefits and skills, and real learning opportunities that were taken back after the experience of a Commonwealth scholarship, I would, and talking about the things I've been talking about myself as well this afternoon, I do think that it's worth saying we do have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there are useful skills, there are useful things that we can learn from each other. So that does include, there are useful things that the global North can teach the global South in the same way that the global South can teach the global North. So the thing I'm a little bit wary of, not with what's being spoken about now, because it's all been very balanced and thoughtful, but in general, is oversteer and sort of like a sort of 180 reversal, where everything is rejected that's gone before, and is seen as bad and wrong and ill-intentioned, which isn't always the case. So I think it might be a bit of a dodgy thing to say, but I think it's just a case of really thinking. It was lovely to hear then about genuine benefits and skills and things that have been taken back and used in a very productive and very sensible, thoughtful way. So so it's just that idea of keeping the balance of what we need to challenge and overthrow and what we might want to preserve.
Thanks, Joe. I'm just checking to see if we have connectivity to Ayobami. If not, I'm going to suggest that we go to a very short break and then come back for some Q&A. It doesn't look like we do have connectivity right this minute. So hopefully she'll forgive me for cutting to the break, but we can ask her when we come back. So this is just to encourage everyone to take just a couple of minutes to talk to each other using the chat function or using the sidebar function, or if you need to make a cup of tea or get some water, that's also fine. We'll reconvene in 4 minutes at 3:25 UK time. And I had one particular request, and this is completely down to my technical ineptitude, but Beatrice in the audience asked a question, and if you could re-ask your question using the function at the bottom, then we can pose it to our panelists when we get back. But otherwise, I think there's a few really meaty strands of discussion we can pick up anyway. So I'll see you all in 4 minutes from now. Hi everyone. So I think we'll make a restart because we just have 20 minutes left of this. Just before we start on the questions, we do have Ayobami back with us now. So I hope you were able to hear some of Philip's.
Okay, thank you so much. I actually went offline. I think something went wrong with my connection. And concerning Philip's presentation, I just have few things to say. I think the international students, all of this knowledge gathered are really useful to them when they get to their home countries, as development curricula has this potential to stimulate radical thinking. I think I said that earlier. There's a way it stimulates radical thinking to tackle injustice and inequalities. And I think these international students, they get so responsible and they are charged up. They are charged up and they see things in a different view, in a better view that leads to social change in their home countries. They are able to challenge all of these patriarchal beliefs. For example, in the developing countries like Nigeria, these international students, when they return back to their home countries, they are able to challenge all of these Eurocentric sexual framework, and they are able to think differently and make a reasonable contribution. And they are able to challenge all of this patriarchal belief and bring in a new way of thinking to actually change all of those things that leads to inequalities and discrimination in their own countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, that's really nice to hear as well. And like you say, that it can be a sort of energizing experience. And Philip also mentioned the networks that he made, that he still draws on now to, inspire him along the road, which are often quite difficult roads in different parts of the world. I'm realizing now we've got 15 minutes for the whole thing, which is only 10 minutes really for questions, because Paul will say some closing words. So I was hoping we could publish the question from Beatrice, who's from the International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth in Brazil. There's a way, I think, of sharing this with you on the screen. And the question is, I think it's a really interesting one. It's the question about how the criteria by which universities are ranked and how these reproduce power imbalances between the global north and global south. And the example that Beatrice gives is whether this also therefore has an effect on the employment opportunities that follow in the development sector. So I don't know, Ayobami, would you like to comment on that? And then we'll go to Joe second.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, I think it's a really good question, because these sorts of metrics and league tables and so on, they can be. We had a brief discussion about this at the talk yesterday about the universities and the SDGs, and talking about there being a new SDG league table in the Times Higher for UK universities about who's doing best. And I think I made the comment then, and I think the same now, is the fact that league tables potentially do have a place at sort of trying to challenge institutions to do things better, particularly the problem there is, what are you asking them to do better? It's like, well, who chooses the indicators feed in, again, we're going back to first principle, who chooses the indicators that feed into the league tables? Because if you are very much focusing on things that are resource dependent, then you are embedding inequalities even further. Whereas if you are, if your league table is challenging you to decolonize your curriculum, or to engage international students with what you're teaching, or other things, they can be a real force for good. So it's very much, again, who decides what is important in terms of what a university should be doing. And I think that opens up. So I keep opening up questions are a bit too big for the time we've got. But I think you look at a league table. Somebody has decided when they created that league table, what should universities be doing? Well, that is a big question, and everybody should have a voice in that debate.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because the debates around league tables and rankings are often also tied to the question about the commercial benefits attached to those.
Yeah.
And earlier we were talking about the student as an empowered consumer who can use that to sort of influence the debate. So again, it's got both sides of the balance, I think, this debate.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Ayobami, would you like to comment on this question about rankings, power imbalances, and potential sort of knock-on effects into the employment side of things in the development sector?
Sorry, I didn't get the question right, please.
So the question was whether you'd like to reflect on the criteria that are used to rank universities and whether they reproduce power imbalances in the global north and global south. And again, whether that has knock-on effects for employment in the development sector.
Okay, thank you so much. I think the issue of ranking, people do not really focus on effects on development of the student. I think it is majorly it focuses more on marketing, as in making the university feasible. I don't know if I'm actually contributing to the question. It is more of making the university visible for people to see, not focusing on the subject. I think the focus is more on the objects, which is very, very important, because for us to have the development, all-round development, there is need to focus on the subject. Who are the subjects? It is the students. What are they being taught? In which environment? I think the issue of rank is actually the university, bringing the university to the limelight, saying, making people see the university, more of focusing on the subjects, because the subjects are not always focused on when it comes to ranking. It actually focuses more on the university, that we want them to see the university, not minding what is happening with the students in the university. And I think it is very, very important for us to focus on the subject, for us to focus on the student, because these are the people that will actually make that change, that social change that we are hoping for and we are clamoring for. And I think when it comes to criteria, the university is actually being focused on, and the focus should be on who is teaching and how this curriculum are being taught. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
I'll try again. I could hear everything there, Ayobami. I hope you can hear me now.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I think you've focused our minds, I think, on the really important questions about what the university is and should be doing with its students as partners. So I think we have time for another question, which comes from William Bramwell from the Commonwealth Scholarship Commission in the UK, which is, how do we broker conversations with other disciplines or parts of the university that may not see themselves as otherwise contributing to the challenges we've discussed today? So it's a really interesting one, because I think this conversation, a lot of the conversations we've had often happen in a very deep and measured and informed way in certain departments, and not potentially in others, and potentially not in all elements of the professional services as well. So I wonder if, Joe, I could ask you to reflect on that. I'm asking the people I can see on the screen because I think we have a couple who have connectivity issues. So I'll continue to bring in the speakers when I have them with me. Thanks, Joe.
I think it's a really good question, and I wish I had an answer. Because I think the notion of silo working and everybody sort of focusing very much in on their own interests, I worry that it's only going to get worse, because yes, we have students are becoming increasingly engaged. That's our one good hope, in the fact I see my students and they're a lot better than I was when I was a student. They're a bit, you know, they're a lot more proactive, they're interested, they're worried about social justice, a lot of them. And yet we again have this competing pressure of commercialization, whereby you get by with your publication record, but your publication record depends on narrowing down your focus, specializing, and therefore you potentially are that will work towards your promotion, or the way in which the university can get a very specific particular reputation. And so it's this competing challenge of balancing these commercial needs, which aren't going to go away, with what we want our universities to actually do. And trying to break down silos is very hard. And in fairness, to be fair to academics, people are working at a very high level in a wide range of subjects. And when I talk to, in my program, I talk across schools, not to biology or physics or anything, but I talk to politics and geography and business school, economics, about what modules I can put on my program for my students in the development course, because it's very interdisciplinary. Then, we're talking, I'm okay with the politics guys because that's my background, but with the geographers and stuff, we're talking about things that do dovetail a lot, and yet we still don't fully understand what each other are talking about a lot of the time, because we're just working at such a deep level in our own subjects. So trying to find common ground and common languages, common vocabularies, in order to be able to dovetail and overlap our work and break down silos, to then present a decolonized curriculum overall, or these sorts of challenges we're talking about. And I would love to hear if anybody has got answers, because like I say, it's hard enough for me just talking to the geographers. We should be in the same boat. So that wasn't very helpful, but
thanks, Joe. But I think you've highlighted that there are competing incentives within an institution, and having alignment, at least, about what we're all trying to achieve would make some of those discussions easier. Abbas, you've joined us. Would you like to reflect on this question as well, about conversing within the institution?
Okay, thank you. I think it is systemic. When we look at the power dynamics that shape structural and productive relationship. When I say productive, I mean, okay, who are those determining what is being produced as knowledge and how these knowledges are being produced? And from a decolonial perspective, we should understand that we should deflect from the use of knowledge and go further into the acknowledgement of knowledges. So if we're able to grasp that a reality, then we can be able to know how individual departments or courses can contribute to the general conversation of development. So I think we've seen so many ways in which, say, Africa, for instance, have contributed to their own civilization even before colonialism. And what decolonization is trying to achieve is three in folds. We have decolonization of knowledge, decolonization of being and decolonization of power, according to Walter Mignolo. So in that regard, if institutions are ready to deal with these forms of colonization or what decolonization is trying to achieve, it is possible for every discipline to come to see what ideas are white ideas, what ideas are reinforcing colonization, what ideas are invisibilizing blackness. And if you're able to understand this, then you're able to come to think on how we can actually deal with the issue of epistemic violence in curriculum, or say underrepresentation of scholars. Because one thing about diversity is when you have diversity of people, you have diversity of thoughts. But if an idea is coming from just a single stream, definitely you always be thinking that that stream is the only source of knowledge. But if you have people with different experience, perspectives, views on board in a department, they can come together and contribute to their experience and perspective. So I don't believe that there's no area of knowledge that cannot be decolonized, because we have strands of knowledge. Even development on its own is phased. So before a particular field becomes a field, it has so many developmental stages. So in that regard, we have to go back to that drawing board, then we see how we can recalibrate a curriculum to encompass everyone that is meant to be in that class, or that curriculum is being designed for. So it is just about meeting the needs of everyone, or trying to use multiple means of representation to achieve goals of all kinds of students that we can have, or that we can possibly have in the classroom. So that is just my contribution to that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, really helpful. It looks to me as though we don't have Philip or Ayobami, unfortunately, with us anymore. So I'm going to take this opportunity to say thank you so much to Abbas and Joe and Ayobami and Philip. And thank you so much for a really rich discussion. We've covered today geopolitical conflicts, funding flows, universities as places of radical thought, but also need for reform. We've talked about epistemic freedom, and we've talked about modes of inclusion and some of the really good impacts that we can have if we get this right. So I'm delighted that I don't have to synthesize any of that into an answer. I get to hand over to Paul to do that. But once again, thanks to the CSC for organizing. I think this is a really well put together discussion, really good questions. I can't take any credit for them, which is why I wanted to thank Brendan and Paul for their contributions. And thanks a lot again to the speakers. Over to Paul.
Hi, thanks, Faye. I'll be very quick because I know we're already over time. I won't even attempt to try and synthesize this into anything vaguely logical. I'll point out a few things that I've got from the discussion, but there were a couple of things that was specifically raised to the CSC that I thought I ought to kind of answer. I think Abbas raised a couple of ideas about what the CSC should be doing in terms of exchanges and the development focus. And I should have pointed out at the beginning that as a commissioner for the CSC, I'm a volunteer. My day job is a professor in a university, and I think that we take the development focus and the development statements that you mentioned, Abbas, extremely seriously in everything that we do. I don't think we spend as long discussing anything as we do those development statements when we have selection meetings as a group of commissioners. But I really like your idea of the kind of follow-up projects. And in fact, it's something I've done in projects that I've run in South Asia in particular. We ran some in Bangladesh where we did precisely that. And I quite like that. Quite how we would do that, I have no idea. The pairing universities thing, I think, relates to something else that I wanted to say about different agendas under the REF, because the REF came up a few times and it comes up in relation to the university rankings. And I think, like Joe said, there are all kinds of problems with university ranking systems. And on one level, I don't believe in any of them. But there are certain aspects of that I think are deeply exclusionary. And I think in particular, I was thinking of journals and publications in academic journals, which are very exclusionary policies. So, and I speak as an editor of a journal. So I'm a co-editor of the Journal of Civil Wars. And myself and my co-editor Jonathan have been trying very, very hard to get people who actually live in countries that are having civil wars to write about civil wars. And it is incredibly hard to get material that is of a good enough quality. And it's not the fault of the people who are the authors. It's the fault of the way in which they have been producing knowledge, and also the style that the journal, the international journal, demands. So what we've tried to do, what we've actually just done yesterday, is appoint a deputy editor specifically for what we would call a pre-publication, to do a pre-publication job. So we have decided we want more of those authors. So we are going to help them get published in academic journals, whether it's ours or others, because it's partly a stylistic thing. And it's actually deeply exclusionary. And that's a fundamental part of all of these kind of rankings. So I'm completely with you in terms of the exclusionary elements of this. I think also, though, that the ref is changing. Now, along with university rankings, I don't tend to believe in the ref very much anyway. And I speak as someone who is good at the ref and is about to sit on the ref subpanel for development and anthropology. So I am part of the ref. And I would say that everyone has a very honest approach to doing the ref. But actually, we are all constrained by a series of rules and regulations. However, I think they are changing. And I think they're changing in a very positive way that relates to something that Abbas also said, which is about open research and about co-production of knowledge. And I think the open research agenda gives us as social scientists a really way forward to develop proper partnerships with institutions in the global south. And I see that as a really important way forward. So my day job in the University of Birmingham is to be the Director of Research for the Social Sciences. So I'm nominally in charge of all the social sciences. So I have been trying to develop a system where we don't just take students from the global south, bring them to Birmingham and teach them about the countries where they're from. That we actually, what we do is we co-produce a PhD. So we jointly supervise a PhD with someone in an institute, in an institution where the person is. They could come and spend a year or 2 years in the UK and get some of those benefits. They spend the rest of the time in their home institution, and we share the supervision and the burden, but also the enjoyment of supervising a PhD. And that way we develop a very, very healthy link with people in the global south. I do this in Kampala. I do this in the University of Addis Ababa and various other places where I co-supervise students. And I found that to be actually quite effective. And it goes back again, I think, to some of the key points. And I've just got a couple of things just to raise about this. It's interesting that I think it was Joe mentioned it. There's a lot of politics around knowledge creation. And interpretation of knowledge. I love the idea of giving people raw data and asking them to interpret them and getting what do you think about what this person has said and how do you contextualize it? And I think it's quite interesting to me as a university teacher how much of this goes back to pedagogy in the classroom and individual teachers dealing with people in the classroom. That to me is a kind of fundamental relationship that I think needs to change. And decolonizing the curriculum to me is as much about decolonizing individual teachers as it is about decolonizing the actual curriculum. And I go back to something, I think my favorite comment of the whole thing, I can't remember if it was Philip or Abbas, it was one of you two who said you can decolonize everything. There's no limit to what you can't decolonize. And I think ultimately what you have to decolonize in this context is the people who are doing the teaching, standing up in the classroom. So on that note, I think I'll probably finish because we are way over time. And I wanted to thank all of our presenters. I thought that was an extremely rich and an extremely interesting and engaged discussion. Thank you to all of you for taking part in that. I also wanted to thank Brendan, who has seamlessly and somewhat anonymously managed all of the toings and froings back and up and down from the podium. I think you've done a great job, Brendan. Thank you very much for that. And I also wanted to ask Faye, because managing these kinds of conversations is not easy. And I think you've done an extremely good job. And you're a bit like a really good referee in a football match, that actually you were there and you maintained the rules, but in some senses you didn't really notice that you were managing the whole thing. It just went very, very seamlessly. And I think you've done a really good job. So thank you all for participating. I hope you found it a very interesting discussion. I hopefully see you again, and have a good weekend.